In the arena, 10 years ago, fresh out of law school, I joined CRLA to help launch a first-of-its-kind program to provide free legal services to vulnerable LGBT people in rural California. The program was inspired by a client that CRLA had represented. She was a transgender woman from Mexico. She had spent years working in a packing shed. Since she was a young girl, as early as she could remember, a young boy, she had been labeled male, but she always felt that she was a girl. For years, she worked at that packing shed, and slowly but surely, she climbed the ranks of management. At one point, she was supervising over 100 employees. Then she decided to start publicly living as a woman. Almost immediately, she was demoted. She started to experience daily verbal harassment. She was even threatened with violence. Fortunately, CRLA was able to represent her, and after resolving her case, there was a sense that this was just the tip of the iceberg, that there were many more people like our client who needed help because they were LGBT. Our attorneys and staff, they wanted to do more. Many of my colleagues had gay brothers who passed away in the 80s or the 90s at the height of the AIDS epidemic. In their memories, they wanted to do more. California had a set of newly minted civil rights protections to protect LGBT people from discrimination. Slowly but surely, we trained a small army of attorneys and staff at CRLA to provide legal assistance to this previously overlooked community. Over the years, we've represented hundreds of LGBT people in many different types of cases, though primarily employment, sometimes education, and immigration law as well. Through doing this project, we've had to combat two really difficult myths. First, that LGBT people are primarily white and wealthy and living safely in big cities like San Francisco, LA, and New York, rather than in places like Monterey County. We've also had to combat a notion that rural towns and small cities are inherently unwelcoming to LGBT people. Fortunately, one of the great privileges that I've had in doing this work is working with amazing LGBT leaders and allies in places like Salinas, Watsonville, Gonzales, Merced, countless small towns, even El Centro down on the US-Mexican border. And we all share this common core belief, this faith that equality belongs everywhere, and slowly but surely we're going to accomplish that. Many people have asked me, how did I come down this path in my career? How did I start practicing LGBT civil rights, and especially in rural communities? Well, I think, in terms of jumping in the arena, like President Teddy Roosevelt likes to call it, oftentimes we jump into the arena because our own life experiences. For me, I remember growing up in Salinas, and everywhere we lived next to the field. There was one period of time where we lived next to the jail, but by and large, we lived next to the fields. So every morning, when I would get up to go to school, whether I was walking to school or I was jumping, onto a school bus, I'd look out and I could see already crews of moms and dads, grandparents, cousins, already hustling up and down the rows of strawberries, bringing produce to the trucks. And it amazed me that people could work so hard and yet barely make ends meet. And I wasn't related to these workers in the field, but they were only a generation away from me in terms of my life experience and my family's experience. So like many of my family members, especially the older ones who spent time working in the field, I just couldn't fathom that people could work so hard in this backbreaking labor and yet have such a tough time, whether it's in getting the right schooling for their kids or whether it was getting safe housing. Sometimes we see injustice in our own community and we don't have any choice. We want to jump in and help. And for some of us, we're thrown into the arena through no choice of our own. I remember as a teenager coming out to myself as a lesbian and realizing that I felt this sting of stigma and discrimination. I was coming into my own as a young adult, as a teenager, like so many others, realizing that we were faced with this reality where there were states that banned marriage, that LGBT people couldn't serve openly in the military. There were some states where courts were stripping child custody for gay parents just based on their sexual orientation alone. So gay parents could lose their kids. So this is really dehumanizing for me, and I think in many ways angering. And fortunately, I had a great education and I had wonderful opportunities. So later in life, I had the golden opportunity of having my dream job as an LGBT civil rights attorney in my own hometown, Cisneros. I also had an opportunity when I was working in San Francisco with a firm to represent a group of renowned constitutional law professors in an amicus brief to the Supreme Court. We were struggling to overturn Proposition 8 in this case, and I was burning the midnight oil, working on this brief, poring over trial transcripts. I'd come home at an ungodly hour. I'd scoop up my newborn baby, Carmela, and I'd snuggle her for a bit, and then I'd climb into bed and my wife would already be fast asleep. I felt like in that time I was just reclaiming a little bit of my dignity just by merely standing up and fighting and having this opportunity to go to court on my behalf and on behalf of my loved ones and my community. So I think for many people, you jump into the arena because you feel like you have no choice. Of course, I know a lot of the LGBT attorneys on that case felt similarly, and many of the civil rights attorneys that I work with and other folks who are activists feel like our work is not done at all yet. Our communities are still profoundly segregated based on race and class. Too many politicians resort to scapegoating Latinos, Muslim people, immigrants, rather than relying on good governance to win votes. So our work isn't done by any means. And when I think about what it really takes to create lasting social change and civil rights and the arena of civil rights and human rights, really what matters most is society at large. The victories of courtroom warriors can be short-lived if society as a whole, if our moral compass collectively doesn't shift. So in saying that, what really matters the most is whether or not you're going to jump in the arena. And when you jump in the arena, what are you going to stand for? So join me.